Hey, what's going on, everybody? Jay here, and I'd like to welcome you guys back to another Nordcraft 101 tutorial, and this will be on actions. Now, for reference, if you want to check out any of the examples that I'm playing with here, or just how they're built in general, you can go ahead and visit the link in the description. It will also be in the pinned comment, and that'll bring you to this website to where you can open the project by just pressing this Open Project button, and this will actually bring you into Nordcraft so you can see how everything was created. Ladies and gentlemen, as well, if this video provides you any value, please do me a solid and leave a like, leave a comment on what you'd like to see more of, and subscribe as we're trying to hit 100 subscribers. And if you are a B2B digital agency, go ahead and check out RiseWare if you need software or automations done. All right, enough plugging. Let's get into the actual video here. So, actions in Nordcraft are kind of like, well, I can't even say kind of, they are literally code blocks. So, this allows us to run actual blocks of code here in Nordcraft. Because as we know, by default, Nordcraft deals with formulas, which is sort of this visual way of kind of doing what you would do in code, but without the code. So, if we wanted to do things like if we wanted to create an array, all we got to do is say, I want to create an array. And then when I press this plus, it'll create an object in that array in which you can see the output here was an array. But say what I want to do is for one, either it needs to be asynchronous or it's just very complex and I just rather write it out in code. I can create it as an action. So here on this page, in the last video, we were talking about events, and we had this event that would just send data up after after simulating some API calls and such like that. And then it would send the data up one level and we'd be able to receive it in another component, which if I just show you really quickly what that did, you see it just says, okay, I received some information from this form via an event, and then it will show that data. So now this one is going to work similarly, but instead of having it as an event or via workflows, but instead of having it as an event, we're going to do it with actual code. So here in the example here, we can see that we have this form component. This is the same form component that's being used on the events page. All it does is it just sends out the form data from the fields that it has inside of there. Then what we are doing is once we receive that, we are then running this process data action here. We're going to go look at the code in a second, but you can see here, we're then determining, okay, if things are an error, then we'll do this. If things are loading, then we'll do this. And if they're and then if they are a success, then we'll also do something different. So let's actually take a look at the code here. So in here, what we're doing is we have an argument called the user in which what the code states is that it's expecting it to be an object. So if it is not an object or user was not provided, we're going to trigger the ctx.trigger action event called error, and then we're just going to throw an error. So let's talk about what's going on in the code here. So for actions, for one, they can be asynchronous. So if we need to wait for something to be completed, actions can be asynchronous. We can also have arguments for actions, so things we are expecting to be passed in, and you can select their type from this list here. And then typically this would be available via an args variable, as you can see there, but you can also just destructure this to get that specific user variable so you don't have to, so you can do user instead of args.user. So you can just destructure it just like so with user. So then in the code, we are saying if there's no user or the type of user is not equal to an object, then we want to trigger a event. Now this event is specific to Nordcraft, and this allows us to have sort of the code and the Nordcraft editor kind of intertwined and in sync. So we're saying, okay, If there's no user object or there's no user, I want to send this event back to Nordcraft to say that there was an error, and then from there I can have some sort of workflow or something, whatever I want to do to show that there was an error. So for example, if we go back to the code here and we look at this on submit, on this form submit, we can see that if it's an error, what I want to do is I want to set error to true. And setting error to true is just going to show this little error card just saying to check the formula like so. Again, back in the code. So if we do have a user, then we're going to trigger the loading state. So then again, the same thing here is that on that form submit in loading, we want to set a loading to whatever the value that we passed in was. So you can see here that with these events, you can also pass data. So you can see here on the right side, we have three events. On the left side, we have error, we have loading, and we have success. Now, I'm not really sending anything with error. If I had an error message, then I could have a string example. I was like, this is an error message. But as you can see here, I'm not returning anything with that error. And then if it's loading, an example output would be true. So you can see here that after I triggered that event, I can also pass in some data, in this case being a Boolean, saying that loading is then true. Then we're going to wait 1 second. We're going to set loading to false, and then we're going to trigger this success event in which we are going to pass the user variable. So this is doing the exact same thing as this event, just doing it with code via actions instead of events. So you'll see here that if we go ahead and fill this form out, we can then see that it's receiving data. Then we'll show the success message with the data, and then that'll be all. So let's actually look at all of those. So on the event here, so we already did on error, we already did on success, or sorry, on loading. On success, we're going to set loading to false. We're going to set success to true, which is going to show that card. And then we're going to set the user variable to the information that we receive from this success event, again, being user, which then can just be used in here. So if I show this as true, it will then show this. And then if we actually have user data like hello, it'll then show it there. So that's how actions work in Nordcraft. And I hope I gave a pretty good explanation. And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you found this content helpful, please do me a solid, leave a like, leave a comment on what you'd like to see more of, and subscribe to the channel. I really do appreciate it. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next time, and happy building.